Welcome, dear futurists, design leaders, and creative thinkers from around the world. I'm Ekaterina from Future London Academy, and today we have another special episode of our Creative Capes podcast. And the special episode is all about trends and transporting and foresight. And we are trialing this new format of Design Hotline, and which means it will be fun. There will be games, there will be questions, there will be a lot of interaction. So be prepared. It will be a lot of entertainment for you, but also a lot of useful information. And today, to discuss this important topic of strategic foresight, trends, futures, all these important topics, I have a great guest, Sebastian Van Leer, the founder of Superframe. Hi, Sebastian.
Hi, Katrina. How are you doing?
I'm very, very good. And just to introduce Sebastian a little bit, he has been working in the whole area of innovation, future and foresight for quite a while. Before he worked at Future Laboratory, now he runs his own company called Superframe, and it focuses on all these interesting things of trends across technology, fashion, retail, and how can we use them to create better products, better services, better brands. So Sebastian really believes in the future and how can we use and harness the future to create a better present. So I'm super excited to talk today to you, Seb. And obviously we have lots of chats about the future ourselves. So finally, other people can listen to what we usually discuss. So I would love to start with a kind of a broad question of why do we need to even think about the future, and how can we generally use it in our life?
I mean, to be honest, I think that's actually a really good question that maybe sometimes we don't ask ourselves enough. At least from my point of view, I would say that, obviously. But I think I'll tell you why I think it's a good question, and then I'll answer your question. But the reason why I think it's good is because I think intuitively, like, people get that, like, if you think about the future, that makes you more prepared, and that's a good thing. So intuitively, like, we get that it's good to think about the future. But then we don't really kind of think more about that. And so often then people kind of go like, well, that's probably it, right? Like, you're just more prepared. But interestingly, there has actually been some research done to, I guess, kind of more rigorously prove as well that actually there are tangible benefits to thinking and really engaging with the future. And so I cover actually some of this stuff on the course as well, because I think it's just good to have this kind of fundamental knowledge, because not everybody always knows this. And I think, you know, when you take foresight into a business, it's good that everybody's aware of the value that foresight can bring. And so I think it was McKinsey did a longitudinal study, obviously, if you want to kind of show the benefits of thinking long term. But yeah, they were able to show that actually kind of businesses that take the long-term view actually through kind of thinking long-term can create this kind of like quite big impact on their bottom line of the business. So they kind of were able to show that, you know, they had quite significant increased kind of margins, they had bigger revenues, but even in terms of kind of market cap, again, they could see that these businesses really outperform businesses that didn't necessarily engage that much with the future. So even from a kind of a pure kind of economical point of view, you know, we can already see that there's kind of value in engaging with the future. And interestingly, there's another study that showed kind of the flip side. And it was this guy called Finkelstein who looked at businesses that failed. And he kind of analyzed the strategies of these businesses and kind of was looking for, you know, what is it, why are these businesses failing? And the number one reason, it was kind of like 80-something% of these strategies kind of basically had like a misjudgment about the future and didn't kind of really give much thought to the future, and which made them kind of miss or underestimate certain changes in the environment. So interestingly, we now kind of start to see some evidence that actually, you know, not just intuitively it makes sense, but actually from a business point of view, it makes sense. And I think there's this guy that I quote in the course a lot as well, but I think he just has so many good quotes. And there's Yogi Berra who said, if you don't know where you're going, you might end up someplace else. And I think that's kind of like in a nice, I think it's like a nice way of putting like, again, like showing the value of thinking about the future, you know, kind of if you don't really engage with the long term and think about where it is you want to be in the future, then you're kind of at the mercy of the present and whatever changes are happening in the present. And you're basically constantly trying to play catch up with what's happening.
I agree. And I think it's so great that you mentioned the kind of the difference between thinking about the future and also making the wrong predictions. And I think that, well, we don't need to go further than the last year where everyone was trying to guess the future, and we're still trying to guess the future. And I think it's very interesting to see how everything that we do actually needs to be considered with what the world will look like in a year. Like, we are not anymore in a safe position where we can just keep doing what we've been doing. Suddenly everyone understood that actually probably thinking long term is a better strategy. We constantly need to be aware of the shifts and changes that are happening and how we can prepare for them. And I suppose everyone who hasn't been prepared for things like digital transformation and thought, that's like so far, and, you know, remote working and all of that will happen somewhere else in like 50 years, and suddenly it happens to everyone. And those who were the least prepared for that scenario turned out to have a loss. And it's very important to have these conversations throughout your journey as a company or a person. And even if they don't happen, you already much better prepared. So talking about the future, and I love that you mentioned the course, because yes, of course, you are curating one of our courses about strategic foresight and transporting, which I already done. So I'm super excited about everything that I've learned. I won't reveal too much to people about the course because I feel like everyone should experience it for themselves. But one thing that you talk a lot about there are trends. And I suppose this is the most common discussion when we talk about the futures. Everyone wants to know what's trending, what are the trends. And I love how you describe in the course that obviously a lot of people think about fads instead of trends, and trends are obviously much more important shifts in the society. They're not this what color is trending today or what hashtag is trending on Twitter. It's about the bigger shifts in the society that will affect a lot of us. So talking about trends, I would love to hear what are your thoughts on the current trends for 2021. Do you have any particular favorite trends? I don't know if you could name 3, maybe ones that excite you the most and that we should all pay attention to.
I'm extremely excited still about health, and I'll kind of dig into exactly what I mean with kind of health. I can almost hear people go like, well, duh. I think, yeah, for sure, duh. It's kind of, you know, the physical health trend, I would say.
And what do you mean physical health, like more preventive health and kind of looking after yourself rather than going to the doctor when something goes really bad?
Yes, exactly. So kind of people kind of really investing a lot more in kind of their food, investing in kind of the exercise that they're doing, etc., to kind of indeed with that eye on kind of more of a preventative health. So I think obviously that's kind of been happening for a while, and then kind of recently we've also seen more investment in kind of mental health. But what I think, for example, is like a really interesting addition that kind of was very emerging last year, where kind of was sexual health, essentially. And kind of sexual health kind of coming out of like the dark corners of the taboo world, and kind of people being like, well, listen, like, you know, sexual health is a part of like, you know, your health, and it has an impact on how you feel and kind of how you look at yourself. And we shouldn't be afraid to talk about it and engage with it, really. And so what you're kind of seeing is new interesting products, a lot of them kind of designed by women for women, and kind of on the market as well, and kind of also like with different purposes as well. But even kind of in terms of like spaces popping up where women come together to kind of actually also just talk about sex and kind of maybe sometimes what they struggle with, what works for them. to even kind of like in terms of like content, we're starting to see like podcasts that are kind of aimed at kind of people at kind of like sexual health, which I think at the end of the day, that can only be a positive thing, that, you know, we kind of don't kind of keep it in this area of taboo, but actually make that a topic that we engage with, given that it can have such a positive impact on how we're feeling. So I think that personally, I think is a really interesting one. The other one that I'm quite excited about in terms of health is telehealth, which I've heard some numbers, and obviously kind of very much driven by the pandemic, but kind of I think it was in the US before the pandemic, 2% of Americans had kind of engaged with some form of telehealth. And don't quote me on this, but I believe the guy said that now that number is at 70%, so 70. So it's a
Wow.
kind of huge. And again, I think the potential there of making health more accessible and being able to help more people, I think is a really interesting shift. And then the last one, because I think, you know, health is one that really cuts across everything. But what I think is a really interesting one, again, to kind of explore and where we can kind of play around with a lot is wellness architecture. And that also kind of started, I would say, kind of a couple of years ago, that was starting people within the world of architecture to kind of say, you know, actually, the built environment has an impact on how we feel. And, you know, we can kind of design for pollution. And so how do we filter out pollution? And that can even be light pollution. But also, how do we design spaces for mental health as well? And then that's when you can kind of start to see how you can apply that to different spaces. So kind of office design is like an obvious one, but then even residential design, or even retail, right? So I think there's kind of like, it doesn't have to be like a wellness space for you to invest in kind of wellness architecture. It's kind of, I think it's bigger than that. And I think that's a really interesting one. And you definitely see kind of, again, more businesses getting involved. Like IKEA has even these curtains that filter out air pollution, etc. So, you know, it's kind of like you see more.
Amazing.
I know, right? Like, so there's definitely a lot of kind of even innovation happening in that space as well. So I think health, yeah, for sure, I think is an interesting one.
This is amazing. And I love like how many examples you kind of bring up. I just want to quickly play a game with you. So hold, I feel like we will continue talking about trends after we have also a couple of callers who want to get in and ask you many questions. So we'll play a quick game now, but we'll continue with trends after this couple of conversations. So are you ready to play a game?
I mean, am I? I don't know. Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. I'm curious.
Gaming.
I'm very curious. Yeah.
This is the time. It's a fun game, so don't stress too much. So the game is, which invention wasn't predicted by sci-fi? So I think what's interesting about the whole topic of futurism, when we talk about the whole idea of researching trends and understanding what's out there, the whole idea is that the more kind of you imagine different types of futures, the more likely some of them might happen, and then you will be prepared for them. And I think sci-fi has been such a great example of these people who kind of imagine different types of futures, and then they happening with certain time and certain accuracy, which is quite interesting. Obviously, lots of things didn't happen from sci-fi, but still quite a lot of them did, and quite precisely, which is quite weird. So I will name 3 inventions that we all have now, and you need to guess. 2 of them were predicted by sci-fi. They were in literature, in movies, in books, somewhere, and 1 of them wasn't written by anyone, maybe not sci-fi, but written by someone, imagined by someone before it was invented. So 2 are predicted and 1 hasn't been predicted. Are you ready?
Yeah, okay.
By the way, everyone who's listening can try to imagine and play this game with us. So the first one, flip phone, antidepressants, or electricity. Which one has not been predicted in any sort of writing?
Oh, God. I would almost think the flip phone.
And you're wrong. So the flip phone, actually, in Star Trek in 1966, an iconic communicator device looked a lot like a Motorola flip phone that was released 10 years later. So that was the prediction. And antidepressants, I think that was very surprising for me, that antidepressants actually, not surprisingly, by Huxley's book Brave New World, published in 1931, it features a mood-altering pill called Soma that acts as an antidepressant. In real world, the first link between depression and chemicals in the brain was established only 20 years later. So he wrote something about something that science actually didn't think about yet. So that's quite surprising. And the thing that actually wasn't predicted is electricity. I mean, the reason for that, maybe some people wrote about it, but there is no memory of that, because obviously 18th century, not many people wrote about electricity before it actually has been invented. But quite exciting things have been predicted then. Okay, second one. It's a hard game. So to be honest, when I was researching it, I was mind blown myself. So are you ready for the second question?
Let's see if I can redeem myself.
Okay. Again, 2 of these have been predicted and 1 haven't been. So which one is it? Is it submarine? Is it credit card? Or is it radio?
I'm gonna guess radio. I'm gonna go with radio. Yeah, I think the submarine was kind of predicted, and there was a writer, I mean, Jules Verne wrote about it. So I feel like a couple of people wrote about that. But anyway, tell me. I have no idea, to be honest.
Okay, you were almost there. And actually, there is a common misconception. Jules Verne actually wrote about it while there has been military testing for 5 years by then. So it wasn't kind of his invention. But he did invent the electric one, I suppose, in his book. So we can count that as a yes. But actually, so that's the one that hasn't been, I suppose, invented by sci-fi because it existed before. But credit cards, I think that was a surprising one. So in Edward Bellamy's 1887 novel, Looking Backwards, the main character falls asleep in 1887 and wakes up 113 years later to learn that his home has turned into a socialist utopia where he could swipe a card to pay for an item. And actually, credit cards appeared in the US only 40 years later. So he predicted a card in his book, and they appeared only 40 years later. And the radio actually has been kind of predicted in, in a couple of novels, kind of talking about the news that will be not read but heard, and all of this fun. So that's quite interesting. Okay, last one, hard one. Let's see if you can try this one. It's actually the hardest. Okay, which one of them has not been predicted? Is it Bluetooth headphones? Is it escalator? Or is it Facebook?
Let's go with escalators.
And you won! Woo! Well done. So it is true. I think this is one, again, that usually people get confused about, but it's actually very, very surprising. It has been patented in 1892, long before any sort of mentions in science fiction. And Bluetooth headphones were actually in Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451. And he talks about seashells and thimble radios that resemble earbuds and headsets that we have now. And in the same novel, he also talks about people communicating with friends through a digital wall. What does it look like? It looks like Facebook. So again, I mean, it's slightly vague, but kind of counts as a right direction. So, well, 1 out of 3 very hard questions. I think you did really well. You did really well. Seriously, these all were really hard. And by the way, I did not come up with those. I have to thank brilliant writers, Peter Katecki, Sarah Kessler, and Alison Cooper, who wrote about these things in different sci-fi communities. So I researched their work rather than had to do it myself. So thanks to the authors. And now it is time for our hotline. So are you ready to answer a question from a caller from the universe?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay, so let's let Rune in. Hi, Rune.
Yeah. Hi.
Hey, how are you doing?
Good.
Good. Thanks for calling in, Rune. Would you like to introduce yourself? Where are you? What do you do?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Rune. I run a small design and innovation consultancy based in Copenhagen, Kurt Thomsen, and we are specialized in supporting the early stages of innovation, mostly within the energy sector. So a lot with renewables, wind, solar, wave, energy storage, and so forth. And we're normally dealing with like the long-term innovation, so you could say the futures thinking innovation. But from a very visual perspective, we're industrial designers and architects, but working more with it from creating images and shared images and shared languages around this new innovation. So what I wanted to hear a bit about was actually some that you also talked a little bit about already, is how do you actually make sure, or like you could say, how do you make sure in these very engineer-heavy processes, like energy, but it could also be other high-tech industries, that the R&D and innovation departments actually see the value in this more explorative approach to things? Because what we tend to see is that, yeah, there's a need for the things, but maybe they already kind of have an idea of where the future is going, so to say. But as you say, there's a value in trying to broaden out the perspective in different scenarios or concepts and ideas.
Yeah, so I think so energy is a really interesting one, because it is indeed kind of one of those like really slow moving industries. I think like transport is another one, with like kind of like the cycles of like cars, or like, you know, when they change, that tends to take quite a while as well. Or like even like ships and trucks, all that kind of planes, all like same category. Like innovation takes a really long time. And then where I probably have the most experience is kind of more development. But same thing, right? Like you build a building and it takes a couple of years for you to build it, and it also ideally like stays around for a while, and is fit for purpose for a while. So yeah, and it's I think I kind of had a very similar experience to you, that not always in these industries that have actually really long cycles that they engage that much with the future. And maybe development isn't that engineering heavy, but let me answer your question first. I think what I think is interesting is kind of when you look at these businesses, and they, like you kind of point out, right, they tend to be quite focused on kind of engineering and the new technology and what it can be used for, and kind of how they can kind of improve on that. But what's interesting is kind of when you look at disruption that has happened in those spaces, it often kind of came from like a blind spot, essentially. And that's really where foresight or kind of like trends can help, because what you want to be doing when you're kind of looking at the future is go beyond your kind of business and your kind of smaller world, and actually look at kind of the world around you and how that's changing. So for example, you know, like I think Tesla, you know, whether you're a fan of Elon Musk or not, as kind of like irrelevant at this point, but you know, like he succeeded in making that the most valuable car company at this moment in the world in just a couple of years. And so again, that's kind of like, that took a lot of people by surprise because it happened so fast. Now you've got Google, who's kind of quite serious about autonomous vehicles. And obviously they kind of had no business, if you will. You know, if you were a classic car maker, you know, you'd say that they have no business in making cars. And, you know, here they are. Now, obviously, Apple is trying to get in the game as well. And then kind of in terms of energy, again, you can kind of see, I think like a lot of them were very much focused on oil and kind of what are new ways to extract oil, and shale was like a really big thing. and then I think it's actually in Denmark, Ørsted, who kind of, they went from Danish oil and gas, and then they decided actually, like the future is not in fossil fuels, the future is in renewables. And I think I looked them up, and they are now the most sustainable energy company in the world, as of this year. And so I think, if you kind of, in those sectors, the focus is very much on like, let's focus on the technology and improving that. But if you kind of don't look beyond kind of your business and look a bit broader, what's likely to happen is you're going to be caught by surprise by a change somewhere else where you think, oh, that's probably not relevant for us. But then all of a sudden that changes.
Can you, along with that, can you elaborate on like how do you make sure that you use like the right foresight tools or the right future thinking tools where you are in the process, depending on where you're like deep involved in the innovation process, or you're more involved in the strategic definition and vision process?
Absolutely. So I think one of the things that I think is quite important, if not critical, when kind of using foresight, is try and kind of engage people as much as possible in that foresight research that you're doing. So kind of rather than kind of showing up to an innovation workshop where you kind of want to develop new ideas and prototypes, etc., with a set of trends and introducing it there and then, it's always good to actually, as you're researching the foresight, to involve all the people who are also going to be involved later down the line and who will actually be working with it, especially with engineers, right? Because they usually know a lot, especially about technology. So it's really good to kind of for them to unload everything they know on you, but then also kind of bringing in outside experts to show that there's kind of other people out there who are kind of experts in their respective fields, to show them that there is also kind of a rigorous method behind the foresight that you've developed. It's kind of, you didn't just pick up a sci-fi book and went like, oh, this looks like an interesting idea, like let's bring that in, that's the future. Like, it shows them that there is rigorous research behind it, and it's not, I guess, kind of more fanciful, wishful thinking about the future.
Do you see a link as well to like the design tools of like the more design thinking and visual communication tools as such, and how they bridge into the foresight tools and methods?
Yeah, I think absolutely right. So I think one of the kind of more foresight futures thinking approaches that kind of sits between, like, if you will, like strategic foresight and kind of innovation design thinking is speculative futures, where you then take the futures, you paint a picture. You can either kind of do one scenario, or you can do kind of a couple of scenarios that you develop, and then kind of start to imagine how people in that scenario interact with your product or your business or you, and really kind of explore what the impact of that is on people. And that's like you said, that's a really good way, again, to kind of get people to engage with the futures in a way that's more helpful and kind of not purely analytical, because obviously like the future hasn't happened yet. So you need to kind of use a little bit of your imagination to start thinking about what does all of this mean? What do all of these changes and shifts mean? And then I would say, to your point, as much as possible in terms of kind of visualizing or bringing the future to life as possible is super helpful. And so there's been a couple of times where what I've done is we've done workshops that indeed had kind of more of an innovation focus. And when you kind of are able to bring in kind of like artifacts of the future, if you will. And that can be, kind of emerging artistic kind of innovation. Somebody's kind of been playing around with a certain material, etc. But that you can kind of bring that into the room, so people can kind of get a feel for it and kind of go like, oh, it makes it a bit more real, even though it might be like a prototype, or, it's kind of an artist kind of playing around with some new materials. But all of a sudden people kind of see why it's interesting to play with, why there's value in exploring that further into the future. So indeed, kind of the more tangible you can make that, the easier it becomes for people to engage with it. And that, as I said kind of before, imagine those futures, and you'll get more out of it as well. I think it's quite hard to, just like have slides with trends and kind of present that to people.
Yeah, that sounds really good. So do you also see, because then I hear that you say actually like the engaging process of not only like the team or the group, project group you would be working with, but also engaging from other departments, or depending on the company size, of course, with external collaboration partners. But would you then do it? Is it efficient to do during the process, or is it better to, once you have like a defined future, you could say, to then engage with other stakeholders, you could say, because maybe is it too fluffy while you are in the process, or how do you see that?
That's a good question. I think it depends on kind of what the innovation cycle is, right? So I think if it's a really long one, and it's going to take like a year or even longer, in that case, I think, there is a good case to be made for actually starting to share some of that work, because then people start to get excited about it. However, if you know that, you'll get to a more kind of finished set of products or concepts or prototypes, and you kind of also have that set of futures that as a business you'll be working with, I kind of would wait to like until they're kind of a little bit more defined, if you will, to share it. But yeah, unfortunately the answer is it depends. But yeah, I think because you want to use it for engagement, it's kind of, that kind of, I would say, is the main determinator of like if you would use it or not.
Yeah. That makes good sense to determine where you are in the process, and of course every innovation process is sensitive, so it has to be decided towards that. Thanks for your time and answering all these questions and having the discussion. I think it was really
thanks for dialing in.
So
amazing. Yeah. Thank you so much, Rin, and bye. And it was lovely hearing your thoughts as well. And it's back to two of us. And I love the conversation you were having, because it's very interesting, the parallels also that were mentioned between the creative process and kind of trends and foresight process. Again, whether it's design thinking, if we take it as a most popularized creative process, and kind of how you do research, how you kind of prototype and test different ideas. And there are lots of similarities with kind of trends and foresight process, again, where you research and kind of understand how you can apply certain things and then prototype different scenarios. But there are also lots of differences, which is, again, makes it quite fun to kind of look, instead of look for insights of what's happening right now, you more look into the future, what might happen in the future in different worlds, in different paths. So I find it really fascinating. And you highlighted a really good thing about kind of bringing people into the process. Again, this is probably the classic advice with design thinking or any other creative process, that if you want stakeholders to believe in your final product when you present it, or to give you the right feedback for your prototype, give their early versions, get them into the process, get them there from the beginning, get the right information from them from the beginning. So I think it's even more relevant when you work with such a big topic like future.
Yeah, no, exactly. I couldn't agree more.
Amazing. Well, before we get the next caller, I've got another game for you, Seb, and hopefully it won't be as hard as the first one, but it's also quite hard, I have to say. It will be a lot of thinking, and it will be around trends, our favorite topic. So essentially the game is, I have papers here on my desk, and in one pile I have trends, and I read recent trends reports from Fjord, from LSN, like lots of wonderful reports that you recommended. And I have kind of different professional industries in the other pile. So I'll pick and mix, and then we will try to understand how can a certain person or a certain industry or a certain company apply this trend. Again, we all know that process can take days. We'll try to make it in 5 minutes, but let's have fun and get the most out of it. Are you ready?
Yeah, let's do it. I'm very curious.
Okay, let's see. So first, I'll pick a trend. And the trend is food as a medicine. And to remind everyone what this trend is, it's from LSN, and food as a medicine is being rebranded for modern lifestyle, balancing flavor and function to shape our physical and psychological states. And there was a related, I suppose, category trend, molecular sips from WGSN, essentially that science and tech are serving up breakthrough beverages made not from grains and grapes, but rather meticulously composed molecules. Anyway, there is a lot happening in food as a medicine, how we consuming food. So that's a very interesting trend. And let's see who we're trying to apply it to. Who will be working with this trend? Someone in finance. So whether it's a financial company, a bank, or it's a person working in finance, how can they use this food as a medicine to think about the future?
So honestly, the first thing I was thinking was, right, people in finance tend to work a lot, especially people in investment banking and that side of the business. So maybe, I think I actually just realized what I'm about to say has been done. But yeah, so I think as an employer, maybe what those banks want to be doing is rather than kind of like have the fun snacks that Google used to have, they would have all of these healthy optimizing snacks for their employees so that they're even more focused, that they're even healthier. And so now that I come to think of it, I can't remember who it was, but it was a company in the US. It was a bank in the US who gave these basically healthy foods that were supposed to optimize their health and their thinking and their focus to their employees to make them healthier. So yes,
I think that's a brilliant idea, and I definitely up for this trend because I would never be able to work at Google close to all the wonderful food that they have. I've heard all the stories of how like the first month everyone gains weight and then they have to go to the Google gym to actually lose all of it. So I am definitely up for food that increases your efficiency, abilities, makes you happier, and just makes your life more enjoyable. So I love this. Let's try another one. Okay. So the trend is simple life, and simple life trend is from We Are Social. So people are using social to reconnect with their core values, engaging more with their local communities via digital channels, escaping to simplified virtual realities with games like Animal Crossing, where you pretend to be an animal, anything basically that simplifies your life. Or also people engaging with influencers who practice simplicity as a lifestyle. Think gardening on TikTok, all of these wonderful hobbies that we all picked up while being bored and wanted to do something else, which is not complicated, just simple life. So this is the trend. And who is working with this trend? And it will be a chef who needs to use this trend somehow in their work.
I think that's quite an interesting one, because I think what I think has been interesting in hospitality is, because of the pandemic, all of a sudden you had all these kind of chefs and restaurants going onto Instagram to kind of really I guess open up that whole process, which is something that they didn't really do before. And so I could kind of see them definitely kind of obviously adapting their menu to maybe have some of those kind of dishes that are more kind of simple, but maybe with a twist, to make it still kind of restaurant value. But so yeah, kind of, creating those memories, maybe like nostalgic dishes that remind you of the simple life, and then sharing that on Instagram and kind of how you could make your own version of that. Yeah, I think I would buy into that, to be honest.
I think that's great, and definitely a lot more food experiences can be done. And well, I think I love everything to do with food, so that works for me. Okay, let's try the last one. And what are we picking as a trend? And the trend is Interaction Wanderlust. And Interaction Wanderlust it's from Fjord, and it's all about screen fatigue. More and more of us are grappling with screen fatigue. Our organization must reconsider design, content, and audience for better interaction. People are hungrier than ever for creative content and new interactions. Brands that break free from outdated norms and restrictive design will be the ones that achieve differentiation. So we are all tied with screens. We want to touch things, we want to feel things, we want to do something else than stare at the screen. So how can we explore this interaction wanderlust, and who will be exploring it? And this will be creative agency. Oh, actually, that's that's quite interesting.
Okay, this is quite. I find this one quite a difficult one, because as a creative agency, I wonder if this is kind of, as a creative agency, not just kind of, I guess, relying on all the digital tools that they use to create, but actually kind of going back to maybe some of the more kind of DIY physical ways of creating an idea, and seeing if that can actually lead to people just engaging more with, coming up with new ideas, developing what it could look like. So yes, the kind of, I guess, like a more physical space and physical tools for them to think about whatever solution that they're trying to solve, but having those tangible things for them to kind of connect and play with. If that could be an interesting, almost kind of like have a playroom or have a creative room with no screens.
That's really cool. And I think like definitely something to explore for all of us. I definitely feel like there is more space for interactions that don't involve screens. It's just the easiest one that we are glued to is the one that is all about screens. But definitely we lived without screens before. We had all these wonderful buttons and knobs that we could touch and feel. And I feel like there will be more happening in the area of interactions that potentially will actually go away from screen. So that's quite exciting. We have one more question from the audience. We were sent in a question from Carolina. So let's try to answer that one. So Carolina is asking, the foresight is all about thinking, awareness, understanding, prioritization, and decision-making. As with all thinking processes, we as individuals induce all sorts of various cognitive bends, defects and disadvantages in our reasoning patterns to foresight. Some of the inclinations that simply sneak to the forethought include over-optimism and hopefulness of the outcomes, and the tendency to prefer evade disadvantages to evolve comparable gains. So her question is, which processes and tools do you recommend for kind of a long-term planning and foresight? And how can we create milestones or metrics, especially talking about financial and economical point of view? So I think there are lots of questions in this question. So
I was going to say, yes.
I feel like there are a couple of things that I'm definitely curious about, which is one, kind of our biases in the foresight. I think that's kind of one main theme, which is, again, thinking about the future, there's nothing that can be proven before it happens. So how can we remove our over-optimism or whatever other bias we might have? And the second one, how can we measure anything? And again, with measuring any innovation in design, it's always has been a question, what metrics or milestones can we have for foresight?
Yeah, no, Again, I think this is a really good question. One that I've thought about myself because I've written an article about this, about the biases, because it is something indeed that I came across a lot as well. And my background, way back when I was at university, is in cognitive psychology, and so hence kind of I was kind of seeing these cognitive biases enter the process, and so yeah, I can share a link with people if they kind of find me. I'm happy to share it with them. But yeah, so the answer is there's indeed a lot of biases, and I would even kind of extend that and say it's not just in kind of thinking about the future, but even when researching the future. So there's the one very famous one is confirmation bias. So we tend to give more attention and look for information that confirms the idea that we have about the future. And we kind of tend to ignore the things that don't fit with that idea. So I think it's a really good idea. And I think it's great that Carolina is actually even aware of the fact that, should we not be paying attention to biases? Yes, absolutely. So I think the best way to kind of deal with that is doing a little bit of research on them. There's quite a lot of them. So I mean, not to promote my own article here, but it's what I've done is I've given the ones that I've encountered the most. And I think that's a good starting point to just kind of familiarize yourself with kind of the different biases that might happen. Because I also give some examples of what is it that people might say, so you can kind of spot them a little bit easier, and then kind of have a think about how you deal with them. But I think the overall solution with that is that foresight and futures and thinking about the future is a social process, and what you want to do is you want to put together a diverse team. Diversity again is one of those things that is very hot topic at the moment, and for the right reason, and especially in foresight, this has kind of always been the case actually, that it is a social process. It's near impossible to kind of sit alone at your desk, do your trends research and think about the future, because you really need to talk with other people to start thinking about the different implications, and people will look in different places that you might be looking, and so it's something that you kind of need to talk about it. To do it on your own is kind of near impossible. So I think that's kind of what I would say about the biases is like, it's I would do a little bit of research just to kind of build that awareness, so you kind of know which ones to look out for, and then look out for them kind of across the whole process. So not just in working with them, but even kind of when you're researching, being aware that you might have a bias. Then the metrics. Yeah, I mean, the metrics is a really interesting one. So so kind of as part of foresight, you've got trends, you've got signals, and then you've got your kind of forecasts that kind of have those kind of quantitative models below them to kind of project growth or decrease, if you will. And I think, as we need to make decisions, because we need to allocate capital and other resources and time, etc. And so, the more detail that we have, the more confident we feel in the decision that we're making. And so I think there is definitely value in investing in those forecasts. But I think at the same time, especially in the times that we live, we need to be hyper aware of the value that those forecasts have. And so what I mean with that is there's a couple of quite interesting studies that have looked at forecasts and the accuracy of them. And so I think the two famous ones are the IMF and their kind of forecasts of global GDP that just have been wrong year on year on year for kind of years and years in a row. Similarly with solar energy, and kind of, you have the kind of the World Energy Association predicting how much that's going to increase year on year. And I think for more than 10 years, they've consistently got it wrong, and really dramatically underestimated. And even when they corrected, because it became a bit of a running joke. And even when they corrected, they still got it wrong. So I think it's kind of also being aware to what, not basically using just forecasts when you're making those strategic decisions. I think, it's weighing up those different pieces of intelligence that you bring to the table. So yes, you want to be looking at, okay, what kind of growth can we expect in our category to kind of help inform our decisions. But at the same time, you want to look at that with other kind of foresight as well. So with trends or potentially scenarios or with kind of key uncertainties like a Brexit or who's going to be the next president or, whatever kind of the uncertainty might be, to frame that discussion and not just rely on forecasts, because at the end of the day, forecasts are based on historical data. And so you're always kind of using the past to predict the future. But that's not always very valuable and useful, especially when the world around us is definitely changing quite dramatically. There's a lot of systems, big systems in the world that are changing, meaning that the past and the future are likely to be very different, which then also makes your models, unfortunately, less valuable as the future is going to be significantly different from the past. So to kind of wrap that up, I would say there's definitely value in having those forecasts, especially to inform probably more short-term planning and strategy. But when the kind of further out you go, the less value most of these forecasts are going to have. And that's when you want to make sure that you're looking at the different pieces within that kind of foresight and other intelligence that you have to inform your strategies.
Amazing. Oh, so many great insights. And I definitely recommend everyone to start thinking about all these future tools. And I think now is the best time to start thinking about the future and how we can all prepare for it and find opportunities, because I think current situation only makes us think about what can be in the future, what can we use to our advantage, and as company as well as people. It definitely brings me hope when I start thinking about the future opportunities rather what's happening right now, today, or in the next month. So these tools couldn't be more relevant to the world that we are in right now. Actually, a couple of last questions from me in terms of foresight and future trends. And I suppose one is just, news. How do you feel? How do you know if something is are there any signals when something new comes out, if it's here to stay or if it's here to go? And to give you an example, something we've been discussing with the team recently is Clubhouse. And I don't know if you are on Clubhouse, but everyone is talking about Clubhouse. And something new like that is obviously it's a social network. It's new. It's not as new. It's actually came out, I think, May 2020 or something like that. It's just picked up really well on social media right now, and even Zuckerberg, I think, appeared last week on it, and everyone was discussing, is this the new era of audio social networks? Anyway, as a business as well as a person, we sat down with the team and thought, okay, is that something that we should invest our time in? Is it something that will continue? Is it something that will stop? And how can we kind of capitalize on this? Essentially, is it a trend or is it a fad? So what are your thoughts on this, and how would you approach thinking about something new like, let's say, Clubhouse?
Yeah, I think so. There's a couple of things there, right? So in terms of kind of identifying whether something's a trend or a fad, it can be a bit tricky when it just starts. But what I would say in the case of, for example, Clubhouse, is that kind of audio content has definitely been, for the last years, gaining momentum. And so obviously podcasts, right, are the other really big one there. But there's kind of been some other really interesting ones as well in kind of more music world, where kind of artists are kind of getting those more direct connections with people, kind of basically not on Spotify. And so I think, so therefore I see kind of Clubhouse sitting in this kind of broader trend where people, you know, as you spoke earlier, you know, kind of want to have a moment away from a screen and actually kind of just like listen into a conversation. And so I can definitely imagine that for that reason, it seems like it's part of that trend. So therefore I would say, you know, it's definitely an interesting one to monitor and observe. I think whether or not Clubhouse is going to be here to stay is really difficult because, you know, it being kind of a social network, and with everything that we've been seeing around social networks, you know, they're going to have to deal with that as well, right? They're going to have to deal with hate speech, discrimination, etc. I've heard some bad stories about Clubhouse as well, and some good stories. So I think the success will depend on how they'll be able to deal with that, and make sure that, yeah, it's a platform that people kind of want to tune into for kind of whatever reason it is, but not necessarily to kind of like some other social media platforms that maybe are a bit more divisive and are more polarizing and kind of creating filter bubbles. But I think, so yeah, that's kind of almost more from a kind of like a technical point of view, right, in terms of like how they deal with those challenges, if you will. But I think from a kind of a concept and a kind of value towards consumers and people, yeah, I think I definitely see the value of it. So yeah, I would try it if I were you and kind of experience it. It's kind of the same with TikTok. I did not get it, and then you get on it, and then you get it.
Yeah, I think it's really a good example comparing them with TikTok. We definitely we are trying it, and we're actually going live this week there as well. So we'll see. The best way again to assess something is obviously to try it. It's pointless just to sit and discuss how something will not work. I think my observations on that was two things. Same first as you. Already mentioned, audio is here to stay, and we want to be away from the screens. I use any opportunity to listen to something rather than to read or watch. I really want my eyes to rest. So anything to do with audio, I think, has massive opportunity. And this has been so far the first mainstream social network that relies purely on audio. So I think that's already a success. Whether it becomes a Friendster that kind of as a stepping stone for the next Facebook, and kind of or a MySpace before Facebook that was just an exploration of a certain theme that then grows out of it, that would be interesting to see. I think I can see lots of flaws with it right now. You mentioned obviously the filtration. From my point of view, again, if we compare it for TikTok, if you've been once on TikTok, you know why it's addictive. Like you get it straight away. You understand why it's viral and why it's a social network, because as soon as you get on it, you can't stop scrolling. This is just same with, again, apps like Tinder and everything else. It has this addictive hooked element that just makes people stay. And I have to say, so far, Clubhouse didn't do that for me, because you kind of join some conversation midway through conversation, and you don't really get anything out from 5 minutes of it, and then you kind of go, and you can't have a written version of recording of it. All of these things that kind of stop. There always been problems with audio content, kind of were not really solved yet. So it's very interesting to see how they will develop that. I suppose my prediction was that the social network that has more of a story format of audio, so something like a 1 minute clips of thought, like essentially calling your voicemail and just hearing different people saying interesting things to you. I think that in a kind of attention spans that we have now could be an interesting thing. Again, it's much easier to sit on a sofa and decide what would work. They might have tried it. But I think it's definitely something interesting, and it's here to stay. But I think positive thing about that, going back to your conversation about diversity, is I think actually it might help with the diversity because, again, we don't have those biases with audio. We have less biases with audio based on the appearance of people. So I think it's definitely a very interesting one that can give a lot of voice to communities and people that might have been underrepresented just because everything else was so relying on visual. So interesting to follow, interesting to see.
Yeah, no, I absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think like you said, that they'll probably have to play around with kind of the format and how what format works and what doesn't work. I personally don't mind the longer form because I have a dog, so I have to walk a lot. So that's when I would listen to it, and kind of there is that kind of intimacy as well with voice that kind of creates like a bigger connection, if you will, with a person. So I can see from that point of view that can be quite powerful. Like you say, I think it could be really interesting for diversity and kind of to connect with different voices and hear those discussions. But yeah, they'll have to kind of think about the format, what works best, and I guess we'll see.
Wow, that's exciting. Always exciting to see trends developing in front of our eyes and the futures happening, and being part of it is even more exciting. Thank you so much, Seb. And for everyone, by the way, who love the topic of trends and foresight and the futures and who are thinking about that for their businesses or for themselves, a little reminder that Seb created an incredible course on trends and strategic foresight with Future London Academy that you can find on our website, and it has lots of practical stuff. It has lots of templates and tools that you can use for your workshops and for your business. So I definitely enjoy going through it and would recommend anyone who is planning anything strategic at the moment or plans to grow their company or just pivot to new territories and trying to understand how to stay relevant, whether you are in the brand side or product side or a business side. It definitely applies to all of that. Thank you, Seb. Any last closing remarks? Anything you wanted to say before we wrap up?
I think firstly, thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun. I've enjoyed the games. I think I definitely need to read more sci-fi. That's one lesson I've learned today. And yeah, I really genuinely hope that it inspired people to start engaging, I guess, more with the future and giving it a bit more thought. And I guess the final thing I want to say is that the future, kind of the way that I look at it, and that kind of we work with it at Superframe as well, as kind of thinking about it as a tool to work with, and you're not really trying to predict the future, which I would avoid trying to do because there's not much value in that. But really what you want to be doing is kind of preparing and trying to not be blindsided by anything or be taken aback by anything, but be more prepared essentially for what happens, and build that resilience. But hopefully we've managed to inspire people to start thinking more about the future or the futures.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Seb. And yes, please do follow Superframe everywhere, whether it is LinkedIn or anywhere else. Check out their blog. They write a lot of great content in terms of insights and the futures, and as well as follow Future London Academy. We have lots of insights we share on Instagram, and you can find Creative Capes podcast on all podcasting platforms. So again, if you are into audio, please subscribe, because there will be more conversations there coming out soon, and definitely we'll try to bring you the latest and the greatest from the industry, so stay tuned. And of course, if you're watching it on YouTube right now, subscribe to our YouTube channel, because you will be the first one to hear all the conversations and not miss a thing when it comes out. So thanks everyone for tuning in, and I really enjoyed talking to you, Seb, and until next time.
Bye.
Bye.